everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be all about poetry. I've been meaning to talk about poetry for quite a while on this channel, but I've somehow not got around to it, and now I've found some of the books that I couldn't find before. So yeah, I'm going to talk about some of my favourite poets and poems, some of the poetry that I really loved when I first got interested in poetry, and some of the favourites that I've read more recently. I think if you're new to poetry and you don't really know where to start, a good idea is like anthologies. These are anthologies collected by Salt. I think they still do the kind of year roundups like this. They're just popular poems that are being collected from journals and publications online and all sorts of different places throughout the year, and there's such a wide range of different things. Oh, Carrietta. One of my teachers is in here. Salt's got some quite interesting little anthologies, so I've really enjoyed some of those. Blood Axe also do some hefty tomes. This is one that I had at university for my poetry course, and these are great. These are a big mix of older poems, newer poems, poems from all different kinds of styles, and it's really diverse. There's so many in here. It's great value for money. So I think if you're still unsure about what kind of poetry you like, or you don't really know who to look up and you're worried about spending quite a lot of money, because poetry books are quite expensive for how many pages they are, anthologies are a great way to explore different kinds of poetry and just find out what you like, really. The other places that I would suggest are journals. There are loads and loads of literary journals online, especially for poetry. A lot of them are free to read, a lot of them are just really well put together. My favourite journal is the Adroit Journal. This is a really old copy from winter 2013. I picked this one up because two of my friends got published in it. The Adroit Journal, they don't do print publications anymore. It's all online and it's all free to read, and it's probably my favourite journal like ever. And I found some of my favourite poets through that journal, so they're really, really great to recommend. They also, if you are a poet, they do summer workshop kind of things. I did one when I was at uni and it was a really, really great experience, so I really recommend that if you're into poetry and you have like a free summer and you just want to do something. So they're a great journal. There are loads and loads of other journals as well. Pank is another really good one that I like. Magma, Nine Arch Press, Boat Press, Superstition Review, the Paris Review is quite good, and there are just so many out there. Now I'm going to kind of go through some of my favourite poets and poems from when I was a bit younger, when I was first getting into poetry. This one is Lee. I did talk about him recently actually, because he won worst book cover. I really hate this book cover. But his poetry is beautiful. He has very vivid imagery and lots of narrative poems. Lee, he's an Indonesian American who immigrated when I think he was a child. So he's got a lot in here. He writes a lot about his family and immigration and translations and language issues and things like that. He really explores the kind of beauty in life and family and relationships with people, and I really love his work. So yeah, I really love his poetry. He's probably one of my biggest influences on my early poetry, definitely. My next poet that I'm going to talk about is Kathleen Jamie. This is her collection, The Overhaul. I think it's a couple years old now. Kathleen Jamie is also one of my favourite nature writers, and you can really tell in her nature writing that she's also a poet. The language is just so beautiful. She's from Scotland, and so a lot of her poetry and her nature writing as well is very based around Scotland and nature and the landscape, and how humanity kind of leaves its footprints everywhere and the damage we do to the earth. And the idea of like natural wildernesses being interrupted and invaded by the industrial and the mess we leave behind us. So she's someone that's quite interesting to me. I definitely recommend her nature writing as well. It's kind of got its own sort of poeticness to it. I think all of her work has this natural sense of rhythm, even her prose, and yeah, I just love Kathleen Jamie. The next poet is Vuong. So I have his collection, The Night Sky with Exit Wounds. I think I first read him in the Adroit Journal, but I can't remember. I remember one of his poems, my favourite poem of his actually, was published in the New Yorker. He's very popular at the moment, and he deals a lot with like themes of family and grief and war and immigration. His poetry is very vivid, and he's got a very good handle on just picking out lines and phrases that just really strike you. Your father is only your father until one of you forgets. And it's so true and so simple a line, and just, so yeah, I really love Ocean Vuong's work. And the next poet is Kennard, who I actually met him several years ago. I think it was like 2010. He judged the Royal Young Poets Award, and that year I was commended, and so I think both of these are actually signed. He's a wonderful poet. I think he's someone, again, that you really do need to see his performance poetry. He's got a very poshness about him that really just works with his writing. You can really tell and hear his voice and this middle classness, but he's very, very humorous. He often has a lot of characters in his poems that interrupt his life in certain ways. So I think one of these books has a character called Wolf who interrupts his life constantly with contradictions and telling him what he already knows, and it is really fun poetry. Yeah, and Kennard goes into a lot of different kinds of stuff in his poetry. He's very accessible, I think, and very funny. I think I watched a video of him doing a poem at somebody's wedding once, and I was in tears the entire time. It was amazing. So I'll link some links to some of his performance stuff down below, but he's a really great one to pick up, I think, especially if you're new to poetry and you're not really sure what you like and you're worried about not really understanding stuff, because I think Luke's poetry is so very, he often uses like a narrative or a character, and it's conversational poetry, and what you get out of it, I think, is whatever you want to read into it. Next poet that I'd like to talk about is Mary Biddinger, and this is Overhaul Insurgency. She's a poet that I hadn't really heard about, and I was recommended by a friend of mine a few years ago. This it has a feel of kind of like a chapbook. There's one central character that is throughout all the poems, and it's about her life and how she interacts with the world around her, and she lives in quite a loud and vibrant and boisterous sort of area in South America. There's a lot of social, political, economic kind of charged stuff in her work, and there's a lot of personal awareness, and it's full of the everyday, really vibrant language. And I think the back says, think O for open, think O for eye, a wandering mouth in search of surprises. The heroine of Mary Bidinger's new brilliant collection subs rapid fire syntax for Bond girl bullets, and I think that's the perfect description of it. It's so very ragey almost. So yeah, she's somebody who I really enjoy, but I haven't really read much of her poetry other than this, so I really should look up and see if she's written more, because this was published quite a while ago. This poet is somebody who I have talked a bit about on this channel, because she's come up in my wrap-ups, because she's a poet I've discovered quite recently. It's called Jeanann Verlee, and she's an American poet, and she has two collections out. They're by the Write a Bloody Book Press, which is a fantastic name, I think. This is the second one I bought. I picked this one up in a charity shop. Oh no, it was Book Cycle, which is sort of a charity shop, but specific books, because it had a recommendation on here from Pank magazine, which is one of my favourite literary journals. Jeanann Verlee, she's one of the first kind of confessional poets I've really engaged with. When I was first getting into poetry, I was recommended people like Sylvia Plath and lots of confessional poets, and I was just like, I don't like any of this. I don't like it at all. It doesn't speak to me. I think I've always been more interested in imagery and how imagery can be used in poetry rather than confessional. I've never found confessional to really connect with me, because it definitely feels like somebody else. So I feel like I've been trying to get a bit more into that more recently. So I read Rupi Kaur's book recently, which I wouldn't say that really appealed to me, but Jeanann Verlee, she's kind of similar in that she's exploring mental illness and abuse and how you recover from that afterwards. It's very emotionally charged, She writes a lot of narrative poems about stories that have happened to her. I would say they're a bit triggery, so if you're a bit worried about dipping into a book like this and poetry like this, feel free to message me and I'll give you any trigger warnings that you need. The next poet that I want to talk about is Jeanann Müller. She's one of my favourite poets, and she's definitely written my favourite poem simply because of how accessible she is. She writes really beautiful poems, lots of really vivid imagery, but her narrative poems are very clear and easy to understand. I think she's really great for people who are quite new to poetry and are still trying to explore what they like, what they don't like. I love the way she writes and the way she kind of owns a persona, and she gets really into the voice, and she's got a really good sense of rhythm, so she's really good. I will read one of her poems, find it. This is called Monet Refuses the Operation. Doctor, you say there are no halos around the streetlights in Paris, and what I see is an aberration caused by old age and affliction. I tell you, it has taken me all my life to arrive at the vision of gas lamps as angels, to soften and blur and finally banish the edges you regret I don't see, to learn that the line I called the horizon does not exist, and sky and water, so long apart, are the same state of being. 54 years before I could see, Rouen Cathedral was built of parallel shafts of sun, and now you want to restore my youthful errors, fixed notions of top and bottom, the illusion of three-dimensional space, wisteria separate from the bridge it covers. What can I say to convince you that the Houses of Parliament dissolve night after night to become the fluid dream of the Thames? I will not return to a universe of objects that don't know each other, as if islands were not the lost children of one great continent. The world is flux, and light becomes what it touches, becomes water, lilies on water, above and below water, becomes lilac and mauve and yellow, and white and cerulean lamps, small fists passing sunlight so quickly to one another that it would take long streaming hair inside my brush to catch it. To paint the speed of light, our weighted shapes, these verticals, to burn, to mix with air, and change our bones, skin, clothes to gases. Doctor, if only you could see how heaven pulls earth into its arms, and how infinitely the heart expands to claim this world, blue vapour without end. And that is my favourite poem, I think, of all time. I think it's really, really beautiful. I love how it's kind of like an ekphrasis poem, so you can really tell that she's looked up some of these paintings by Monet and really tried to get into the head of what he was thinking when he was creating them. So Jeanann Müller, I think, is probably one of the most accessible poets. Here she writes really big range of poetry. She's got a lot of narrative poems and just kind of naturey poems and really, really pretty things. They're just very, very nice to read and maybe hold a postcard or something. So yeah, I definitely recommend her for anybody who's quite new to poetry and wants to find a poet that's just pretty. She's very, very pretty. The last poet I'd like to talk about is, he's a bit of an odd one. He was another one recommended to me by a friend only a few years ago. His name's Dean Young, and this is his collection, Fall Higher. He's what I'd call like a surrealist poet. So a lot of his poems are a massive mishmash of very vibrant imagery, and sometimes it's quite hard to find out what on earth he's talking about or really understand it, but the individual images and how they blend together as a whole really make his poetry, I think, really stand out. So when I was first picking up him, I didn't care that I didn't really understand it, because it was really, really nice to read. And he's also another poet like Jeanann Müller who's got a really good sense of rhythm. I really struggled when I was first starting to write poetry with rhythm and like how do you hear the stress. I was thinking, oh, I can't hear stress, can't hear beats, can't hear, I couldn't get it at all, and it was really driving me nuts. So the person who recommended me this, and also possibly Jeanann Müller, I can't actually remember, was somebody who was saying he's really good at rhythm. So this is a poem that I quite liked and kind of understand. It's called Alternating Current. Throbbing is the sunflower, throbbing is the sea. 1, 2, 3 periods in a row. No, not periods, ellipsis. And on the locusts go. silly boy scrubbing at a spot, solar eclipse, projecting half-bitten dot and the pinhole box, and throbbing is the head upon the breasts, throbbing the knot inside the chest. So I can hardly say your name. Trains rattle down by the river, the finger with its silver throbs, the first Monday of every month, Grandma polished to silver. Is life just intervals of pulses, ripples spreading on a lake from where the rock was tossed? Do not forsake me, darling, though we be carried off. Every instance has its day and night, every inkling is full of blinks, the power going on and off so fast we can hardly think until here comes the storm. Poor dog scuttled under the bed, poor dream we recall almost not at all, no matter how we cling, because the throbbing is the sea and we be torn apart. And that poem, I think I could spend all day trying to figure out what that poem means and all the different things going on in it, but I think the sound patterning is quite brilliantly done. I could really hear each of the things. I think the sound patterning is really good. He uses quite a bit of like slant rhyme and half rhyme, and the kind of techniques you were trained to look for during like A-level English. But yeah, so he's quite a bit more technical, I think, than the other poets, and there's a lot more to kind of explore in his poetry, I think. So yeah, I recommend him if you're kind of looking for someone who's got a bit more going on in terms of his techniques and things like that he uses. Those are the poets I want to really talk about today. Hope maybe I've talked about someone you haven't heard of before. I think it's always great to find new poets, and maybe old poets who've been kind of buzzing in the background for the last few years and aren't such on the scene at the moment. I'm going to link all of the poets and poems that I've just talked about down below so you can find them. Some of these I think are also performance poets, so I try and find some of their videos for you as well. Yeah, if you'd like to talk about any of them with me, it'd be great. I'd love to chat with you in the comment section. Yeah, and that was my poetry video for today. Yeah. I'll maybe do another poetry video sometime soon, but more focused on poetry journals and new and emerging poets that I'm really liking at the moment. Because I think talking about poetry is quite a new thing for me. I've been quite a private readery poetry kind of person for quite a while, and I'm trying to get more into it now. I've been writing a bit more poetry, so that's been fun. That's all from me today. So happy poetrying. Bye!